Hey everyone, Noli here from Lakota Fox Leather, and today we are going to be talking about the most important tools that you need to start leather crafting. There are a lot of videos out there about this, but this one really strips down everything to the absolute necessities that you will need. And the good news is, a lot of them are not that expensive. These first few tools are things that you will probably have lying around your house. Number one, sandpaper. Sandpaper is super important for sanding down the leather edges on your projects. And you want to be sure to use a very, very fine sandpaper. I usually use 220 and 320, and that usually works very nicely. But the grittier the sandpaper is, the more little pieces are gonna come up on the edges of your leather, and it's just not gonna finish very well. You want something very fine so that it can make your edges nice and smooth. So number one, sandpaper. The next thing that you will probably have lying around your house is a ruler. Hopefully you can't hear my cat meowing. Hear that? You want to be sure to use a ruler that's very durable. So I would recommend not using wood or cheap plastic because you will tear those to shreds really fast. If you have a metal ruler like this one, it would work great. Or if you have one that's, I don't know what this is called, like plexiglass? Is that what this is called? I don't know. But if you have something that's very thick and durable that won't chip away, that's what you need. And chances are you will probably have that lying around in your house. The next thing that you will need is some sort of X-Acto precision knife or utility knife like this. Any sort of utility knife will work as long as it's sharp enough to cleanly cut through the leather. This is good for whenever you're doing really small, tight corners and very, very precise things. So this is definitely something that you'll need. The last thing that you will probably have lying around your house is a lighter. This will be good for burning down the little pieces of thread after you're done sewing and finishing it off and making it look really nice. If you don't have a lighter or don't want a lighter, you can also buy this thread zapper, and this will be really good because it's nice and precise, and it's really cheap. You can pick it up off of Amazon for just $4, I think. So a lighter or a thread zapper if you really want, but it's not necessary to have one of those at all. Next on the list is knives. Now, there are 3 main knives that you can get, but the first one is the most important one that I would recommend you get starting off, and the other 2 can wait until later. First one is a rotary cutter. This you can also pick up on Amazon for relatively cheap, probably $15–20. You really don't have to get a nice one for this. You just need something to be able to cut bigger sections of leather, to cut out your patterns, and it'll go a lot faster with this because you just line up your ruler and then you cut and you're done. The next tools, which aren't necessary for beginners but that are nice to get a little bit down the road, is either a skiving knife or a round knife. It's not necessary to have both of these. It just really depends on your style. Skiving knives are good for thinning down leather, for skiving leather. You can also use the corner and run it across and use it sort of like you would a rotary cutter. Or you can cut it like I do and just go straight down. Round knives are really good. You can cut along the whole length of this And then you can also use the corner as well to cut things. And I've also seen leather crafters skive with these. So really, whichever one you prefer, but if you're really on a tight budget, I would suggest not getting one of these yet and just going for one of these rotary cutters off of Amazon. And this will take you a long way. The next thing that you will need is a cutting board, some sort of mat to cut on, because chances are, as a beginning leather crafter, you are not going to have a designated space to do your projects in. So if you're starting out and you're going to be doing projects on your kitchen table or on the floor even, which I did, I don't recommend it, by the way. Use a table. Use a table if you have one. You will need something to cut on so that you won't scratch up your floor or your table. Pretty self-explanatory, but I would recommend getting one that's not super big. You need to be able to store your cutting board somewhere. So if you get a really ginormous one, you're gonna have to store it laying flat somehow. If you lean it up against something, it's going to develop ripples in it and it won't lay flat anymore. So you want it big enough for whatever projects you're doing, but you also want it small enough that you'll be able to store it away somewhere whenever you're not using it. The next thing that you will need is also something that you can get for pretty cheap off of Amazon, and that is one of these guys, an awl. Now this is really good for marking your patterns on leather, places where you put rivets, or you can use it for scratching the leather up before you glue it. This is good for a lot of things, and it's pretty generic. You do not need to pick up a fancy one of these. Just get one for a couple bucks off of Amazon and you'll thank me later. Hopefully. You'll need some needles, which aren't that expensive, and you'll need some thread. You can get some thread on smaller spools than this, just to try out different colors, different kinds, and find what thread works best for you. With your needles, you will want to make sure that you get dull points. You don't want it to be sharp. Trust me, it will hurt. All right, the next thing that you're going to need is a hole punch. I would recommend getting 2 different ones. I would recommend a 6 or 8 prong and then a 2 prong for going around your corners. I like to have 4mm spacing in between the prongs, but it's really just up to personal preference. You can definitely spend some money on these, but you can also get some cost-effective ones if you're on a budget, which, let's be honest, all beginners probably are. And the longer you make your bigger one, the straighter your lines will be whenever you're stitching, because there's more room for it to meander instead of going in a nice straight line. Anyways, hole punches. You will need one of these. 2 of them, actually. Whoops. You could use a fork, but it'd have to be a pretty darn durable fork. Another thing that you will need going along with your hole punches is one of these guys. If you look, you can see all of these holes from where I've done some hole punching. If you were to use the hole puncher without one of these, then you would, 1, put holes into your cutting board, and 2, you would probably dull down the edges of your hole punch. The next thing that you are going to need is a mallet or a maul. These things you can pick up for pretty cheap, but it might be a good idea to get one that has some heft to it. They come in 1 pound or 2 pounds or 2.5 or 3 pounds. So you can get different weighted ones. This is one thing that you can not find in your house. Well, you might be able to, but do not use a regular hammer because it will destroy your tools. do not use one of these. Instead, use one that is poly or wood or rawhide. That is going to be the safest for your tools. The heavier you get these, the better for the most part, because the more weight it has, the easier it will be on you, because your mallet will do more of the work for you instead of you doing more work than the mallet. Does that make sense? Next thing that you will need is either a wing divider like this, or a groover. This is just a cheap one. I don't use it, but you will need one of these. What this groover does is it actually takes out some of the leather so that whenever you stitch, the thread lays nice and flush with the leather. It's not sticking up at all. So this is really nice to use, but there's less room for error, because if you mess up, then your project is basically ruined because you have a piece of leather that's been taken out that you can't put back. So for beginners, it may work for some people, they may like it better, but I personally would use a wing divider instead. This is good because you can change how big or small it is, and then you can use this. You run one side along the outside of the leather, and then the other side will mark a line on the leather as you run it across, and it'll make a nice straight line for you whenever you use your hole punches. So this, very important, highly recommend. Yeah. Next on the list is an edge beveler. You can get expensive ones, you can get cheap ones. There are also different sizes. This one that I use is a number 2. I think they range anywhere from 0 to 3 or 4, and each number corresponds to like a thickness. It'll take off more or less leather depending on the number. So that's something to think about. I just go middle of the ground, not too big, not too small, number 2. When I first started out, I did not understand how these things did any good. But it's because I had a cheap one. So you really want to invest enough in it, but you don't have to get the most expensive one out there. You run it across the edges of the leather, and then it makes it nice and round because it takes off that sharp point, and it just gives an extra professional look. Some people, I think they don't always use these. It just kind of depends if you want a more rustic look or if you want it to be more clean. Then a lot of times they will use one of these. I would recommend getting one of these. You will more than likely use it as long as you get a decent one. So edge beveler, not completely necessary. You don't have to get one of these right away. If you're just starting out, it's something that you could probably wait a little bit. So this one, optional, but eventually in the future, you'll probably want to get one of these. The next thing that you will need that is really important is a burnisher or a wood slicker. These you can pick up pretty cheap off of Amazon as well, and they will work just as great. And the more you use them, the better the patina will get and the better look you will get. So you will definitely need to get one of these, but they're only a couple dollars, so it's not too bad. Another thing that is optional that you can get going along with this is like toconal or edge dye, but you really don't need to use that because you can just use water instead of toconal. And honestly, I don't always like to dye the edges of my leather goods. Sometimes I just like it better with a raw edge. It just depends on what you're going for. It depends on the look that you want. If you don't want to get some toconal, then you can just get a little bowl of water, dip your fingers in, run it along the edges of the leather, and then run this wood slicker across the leather. It'll seal off those edges really nice and it'll look super good. Another thing that is completely optional that you don't absolutely need is a stitching pony. This stitching pony was $20 off of Etsy. So you really don't need to get a nice one. I have no intention of upgrading this anytime in the near future. It works really great. You can use this lever and tighten it, loosen it as you need to, and it works great. I just usually put this piece under my leg, and then I've got it right here, and I can sew and use both hands without needing to awkwardly make it work. Makes it easier if you have one, especially when you're starting out, but you can always use something else. Like you could use a book to put your project in, and so you don't have to spend the money on this, and you can just learn to hold your project and sew at the same time if you want to do that. So this one, definitely optional. You do not need a stitching pony. Next thing you will need, that's technically not a tool, glue. You will need some glue. So if you're starting out, chances are you will not need a permanent glue. This one that I like to use is only temporary. It is a water-based contact adhesive. Put some on either side of your project and let it dry, and then when it's dry, it will stick together really nicely, and that is perfect for whenever you're going to sew something together and you don't want it to be sliding around on you. If you do need something that is permanent, I use this Vibing's Leathercraft cement, and it works really nicely. The very last thing that you will need to start leather crafting is leather. You can pick up pieces like this for 20 bucks. It's enough to make a wallet, and can't make leather goods without leather. So this is the last thing that you will need, leather. There you go, there you have it. That is it, that is everything. Those are all of the things that you will absolutely need to start leather crafting, plus some optional things that you can get either right away or later down the road, depending on your budget. If you like this video, if you learned something, please tell me in the comments down below, and be sure to subscribe, because my next video will be talking about where you can get all of these tools. And should you buy an Amazon kit? That is the great question, everyone. Should you buy an Amazon kit? It's easy if you don't know all the tools. It's cheap if you don't have a lot of money to get started. But is it really the best thing to do? So if you want to know more about that, be sure to subscribe, because that video will be coming very, very soon. And if you want to see videos of me making leather goods, also be sure to subscribe, because they're very relaxing and fun to watch. Yeah.